Hey Sanalla, or welcome to Finish Your Plate. Åland is a set of islands between Finland and Sweden, and even though they are part of Finland, they have autonomy, so they have their own parliament and they even have their own flag. And they definitely have their own identity, which is separate from the Finns, especially those in the mainland Finland. Åland's Autonomy Day is June 9th, so I'm gonna make some Åland Svartbröd, which is black bread, rye bread, which has some molasses and some rye malt in it. Plus also, I'm gonna serve it with some Finnish or archipelago style creamy salmon soup. So join me and I'll show you how to make this Åland Svartbröd. Making the Åland bread is a 2-day process, and we're gonna use 3 types of flour. First of all, we're gonna use some rye flour, or as I have here, some pumpernickel flour. We are also going to use some whole wheat gram flour, and we are going to use some rye malt. I'm going to leave a link to each of these products in the description box. I have 250 grams of rye malt, 600 grams of rye flour, and 650 grams of gram flour. I also have a total of 1.2 liters of water. So we're going to add all these ingredients while whisking in 3 steps. We are going to add 1/3 of the rye malt and the rye flour, 1/3 of the water warm into the bowl. We're going to whip it heavily for 15 minutes, then let it stand for 15 minutes. Now 15 minutes has passed, so we're going to repeat the process. Boiling water, 1/3 of the boiling water that we have. A little bit at a time. And now we're going to whisk it again for 15 minutes, after which, after the whisking, I'm going to add 1/3 of my rye, 1/3 of my malt back in. And now I'm going to add 1/3 of my malt and 1/3 of my rye in here. And we are going to let this rest again for about 15 minutes. Now we'll add the last third of the water. Still hot. And I reserved just a couple tablespoons of the water so that it's not hot but warm, and I'm going to use it to bloom the yeast and mix the rest. And now we'll add the last of our malt and all except just a sprinkling of the rye flour. And we're going to whisk this again. About halfway through, we're just going to check the temperature just to make sure that we can add the yeast. It's 42 Celsius now, which is perfect for adding the yeast in. We're just going to scrape the sides of the bowl and get everything off the whisk attachment. And we're going to cover this and let this sit in a warm, non-drafty place overnight. Now about 8 hours has passed. I have here 150 milliliters of molasses and a teaspoon of yeast. Then I'm just going to sprinkle in the molasses. Then I have 30 grams of salt and then our gram flour. So I'm just going to add the rest of the ingredients in our dough and then keep kneading it until the dough is done, about 10 minutes. I've warmed up the molasses for a few minutes in the microwave until it's about body temperature, not too hot. And now we'll just add the gram flour, and we're going to start slow because the bowl is pretty full at this point. The yeast is starting to come alive, so I'm just going to pour the molasses in. So now my dough has been proving for about 40 minutes, so I'm going to split it into individual loaves. I have a bread pan here, so I'm just going to use that, and the rest of the dough I'm going to split into 3 equal parts. Now my bread has been shaped, so I'm going to let this rest proof for another half an hour, after which it's going to go in a 225-degree oven for about 15 minutes, after which we're going to brush it with a mixture of coffee and molasses. After that, it's going to go back in the oven, this time at around 100 Celsius, 120 Celsius, for a total of 6 hours. Now, after baking these for about 20 minutes, we're just going to baste them with a mixture of molasses and coffee. And then we're going to wrap these tightly, and they're going to go in the oven for 6 hours. Now the bread has been in the oven for 6 hours, so let's grab one and let's take a look at what it looks like. And here, you can see that the color has turned very dark brown, and it smells like molasses and malt, which is perfect, which is exactly what you want. Since it's rye bread, or at least mostly rye, you're not going to get a whole lot of gluten, you're not going to get a whole lot of rice from it, unlike from wheat breads, but this one is still very good. It's a little bit on the dense side. So what you can do at this point, since it's out of the oven, you could still brush it with some of your molasses mixture over here, just to give it that little bit of extra sweetness. And unlike other breads, specifically white breads, many people like this style of bread when it's 1 or 2 days old rather than straight out of the oven. That's of course your matter of preference, but just keep that in mind, that rye bread doesn't quite get stale the same way that wheat bread does. So let's slice one of these open. Let's take a look at the crumb. The crumb is pretty soft. It's very tacky. That's probably why many people like this bread when it's a day or 2 old instead of freshly out of the oven. But either way you like it, you're going to just enjoy it with maybe some butter. Or better yet, maybe with some salmon soup. With, of course, a lot of dill. And here we go, Åland Svartbröd with some creamy salmon soup. It doesn't get more classic archipelago style than this. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on Finish Your Plate.